Rigel shivered against the human soldier's battered armor, wiping alien tears from her sapphire skin. As he carried her through the wreckage, seconds before a plasma grenade tore apart the spot where she had huddled. On the war-ravaged planet Arcturus, Terran Defense Force troops battled the ruthless Andorian Empire in a brutal street-by-street conflict for control of the ruined capital. Sergeant Darren Johnson, a battle-scarred veteran, led his squad through debris-choked alleyways, ducking laser bolts and returning fire. Spotting the terrified Andorian girl clutching a tattered doll in a crumbling doorway, Darren's heart clenched. She reminded him of his own daughter back on Earth. Against his training, he signaled his squad to cover him and sprinted into the open, dodging enemy fire and leaping rubble to reach the child. An artillery shell exploded nearby, peppering them with shrapnel that pinged off Darren's armor as he shielded Rigel with his own body. Her muffled sobs filled his ears as the dust settled. "I've got you," Darren whispered, his gruff voice soothing. "I'll get you out of here." But as he scanned the war zone, the grim reality sank in. Cut off from his unit, low on ammo, and surrounded by Andorian troops closing in, Darren had made a promise he might have to die to keep. The fate of this innocent alien girl, and perhaps the entire war, now rested on this one human soldier's shoulders. Darren's fingers flew over his suit controls, activating the cloaking field. A shimmer passed over him and Rigel as the device bent light around them, making them nearly invisible to the naked eye. He knew it was a temporary measure at best. The Andorians had thermal imaging and other sensory tech that would see through the cloak before long, but it was their only chance. Rigel clung to Darren's armored back as he plotted a course through the rubble-strewn streets, his neural link overlaying a glowing map of the city onto his field of vision. The Terran firebase was 2 clicks northeast through the heaviest fighting. As they picked their way through collapsed buildings and burned-out vehicles, Darren tried to distract the frightened girl with tales of his homeworld. "On Earth we have oceans bluer than your skin, and forests so green you'd think they were painted. Nothing like this dust ball." Rigel said nothing, but her grip on his shoulders loosened slightly. Progress was slow, each step an effort for Darren's battered body. The blast that had nearly killed Rigel had taken its toll on him too, even through his armor. Pain lanced up his side with every breath, and he tasted blood, a few broken ribs at least, maybe some internal bleeding. But he pushed on, ignoring his own injuries. The mission came first. Rounding a corner, Darren froze. An Andorian patrol, a dozen strong, was coming straight towards them. He glanced at his cloak's power readout, drained. They were visible. "Rigel, hide now!" He set the girl down, pointing to a shattered storefront. She hesitated, then darted into the shadows. Darren unslung his pulse rifle, sighting down the barrel at the approaching aliens. The Andorians saw him and opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Darren dove for cover, wincing as the movement sent pain stabbing through his chest. He popped up, rifle bucking in his hands as he sent precise bursts into the enemy squad. 2 dropped, then a third, ichor splattering the walls. But more kept coming, an endless tide of blue armor and crackling energy weapons. Darren's rifle hissed, overheated. He ducked back as a plasma bolt scorched the wall above his head, singeing his hair. This was it. He was out of options, out of time. Suddenly the street erupted in a series of deafening booms. Rockets streaked overhead, slamming into the Andorian positions in blossoms of fire and shrapnel. Darren risked a glance back and saw his squad, pouring suppressing fire onto the enemy. He sprinted for Rigel, scooping her up and running full tilt towards his comrades. Plasma fire chased them, sizzling past so close he could smell the ozone. They leaped into a shell crater where the squad had set up a defensive perimeter, energy bolts pinging off the rim. Liam, Darren's best friend and right-hand man, slapped him on the back. "Thought we'd lost you there, Sarge. What's with the blue kid?" Darren looked down at Rigel, trembling in his arms, her wide eyes darting between the armored human soldiers. "She's my responsibility now. We're getting her out of here no matter what." Ava, the squad medic, crouched next to Rigel in the shell crater, her deft fingers probing for injuries. The girl winced as Ava touched a tender spot on her arm, but stayed still, her eyes locked on Darren. Just some scrapes and bruises, Sarge, Ava reported, applying a salve to Rigel's skin. She's a tough one. Darren nodded, then motioned Liam over. They huddled together, studying a holographic map of the city projected from Darren's wrist computer. We're here. Darren pointed at a pulsing blue dot. Extraction point is here 5 clicks through the park. Liam zoomed in on the park, the image resolving into a nightmarish landscape of blackened trees, churned earth, and the rusting hulks of destroyed vehicles. Red icons marked known Andorian positions. It's a fucking kill box, Liam muttered. We'll be cut to pieces before we make it halfway. Darren's jaw clenched. No choice. We stay here, the Andes will be on us in minutes. We move fast, stay low, we might have a shot. Liam held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Fuck it, let's dance. Darren turned to the squad. All right, listen up. We're Oscar Mike to the extraction point. Keep Rigel in the center, eyes sharp and asses tight. Move. They emerged from the crater in a tight formation, pulse rifles sweeping the shattered landscape. Rigel clung to Darren's hand as they picked their way through the rubble, flinching at every distant explosion. An unnatural hush hung over the park, the calm before the storm. The crunch of their boots on gravel sounded like gunshots in the stillness. A shrill cry pierced the air, setting Darren's teeth on edge. He snapped his rifle up, scanning the smoke-stained sky. Banshee incoming. The alien creature dove out of the clouds, a nightmarish fusion of organic and machine. Razor-sharp talons flexed beneath thrumming anti-grav engines, a death shriek building in its throat. Scatter! Darren roared as the Banshee swooped down, its claws gouging furrows in the earth where they'd stood a heartbeat before. He rolled to one knee, sighting down his pulse rifle, and squeezed the trigger. Energy bolts spanged off the creature's armored hide, leaving smoking divots but failing to penetrate. It banked around for another pass, red eyes glowing with malice. Darren cursed, scrabbling at his belt for the Andorian plasma grenades he'd salvaged. His fingers closed around one, priming it with a twist. The Banshee bore down on them, claws extended. Darren threw himself to the side, and as it passed overhead, he hurled the grenade. It stuck to the creature's belly and detonated a second later. The explosion lit up the park like a small sun. Seared flesh and twisted metal rained down as the Banshee disintegrated, its death cry echoing off the ruined buildings. Darren picked himself up, ears ringing. The squad emerged from cover, dusting themselves off. Rigel peeked out from behind a shattered wall, her eyes wide. She darted to Darren, tugging at his sleeve. More will come, she whispered urgently. They always hunt in packs. Darren met her gaze, seeing the truth in her words. In the distance he heard the buzz of Andorian drones, the clanking tread of their war machines. This fight was just beginning. The ground bucked and heaved beneath the squad's feet. Darren's battle-honed reflexes took over. Scatter now, he roared. The squad dispersed in all directions as a gargantuan Andorian harvester erupted from the earth in a geyser of dirt and rock. The monstrous fusion of flesh and metal let loose a deafening bellow, its many eyes glinting with malice as it fixed on the humans. Darren and his squad opened up on the harvester, with everything they had, pulse rifle bolts and plasma grenades peppering its armored carapace to little effect. Rigel clutched at Darren's arm, pointing a trembling finger at a nearby structure. Its walls crumbled but foundation intact. There, we can trap it inside. Her voice quavered, but her gaze was steel. Darren glanced at the building, his mind racing. The kid was sharp. He snapped out orders. Liam, Ava, lay down, suppressing fire. Keep that thing busy. As pulse bolts streaked past the harvester, drawing its ire, Darren scooped up Rigel and sprinted for the building, Liam hot on their heels. Inside, Darren wasted no time planting demo charges at critical support points, silently praying for enough ordnance to bring the whole damn thing down. A thunderous impact shook the building to its bones. The harvester, wise to their ploy, rammed the structure again and again. Fissures raced up the walls, dust cascading from above. Time to go. Darren snatched up Rigel and bolted for the exit. Liam right beside them as the harvester smashed through the wall in a hail of debris, its whirling maw gnashing at their backs. They hurled themselves clear of the building as Darren mashed the detonator. The charges went off in a cataclysmic blast, the shockwaves slamming into them and sending them sprawling. The building collapsed like a house of cards, burying the harvester under tons of rubble. An unnatural hush fell over the ruined park, marred only by the squad's ringing ears. A ragged cheer went up from the humans. Rigel threw her arms around Darren, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. But Darren's grim visage allowed no celebration. They were still neck-deep in Andorian territory. The enemy would be hell-bent on bloody retribution. The whine of drones echoed over the blasted cityscape, drawing closer. Clanking footfalls of Andorian war machines dogged their steps. Darren set Rigel down, unslung his rifle, and steeled himself for the coming storm. The real fight was only just beginning. As the staccato bursts of gunfire receded, Rigel tugged urgently at Darren's sleeve, her sapphire eyes wide. "Sergeant, my father. He's a scientist, working on a secret weapon to turn the war. The Andorians attacked to capture him." Darren's pulse quickened, the implications crystallizing in his mind. This weapon could be humanity's undoing if the Andorians seized it. He keyed his comm, his voice steel. "Change of mission. High-value target extraction. Prepare for hot pickup and enemy pursuit." The squad pivoted, charging towards the coordinates Rigel provided, adrenaline surging through their veins. As they approached the nondescript lab, a sea of Andorian blue materialized, weapons trained on a figure huddled in the doorway. A tall Andorian male, white hair matted with blood, his lab coat in tatters. Rigel's father. Darren signaled his squad into position, fingers tightening on triggers, preparing to unleash hell. But a new threat emerged, a hulking Andorian war machine lumbering into view, plasma cannons thrumming with deadly intent, shimmering energy shields flickering to life. Darren's jaw clenched. They were outgunned, but surrender wasn't an option. "Liam, Ava, flank it. Find a weak spot. We'll cover you." The air erupted in a maelstrom of plasma and pulse fire, the acrid stench of burnt metal filling their lungs. Rigel, eyes hard with determination, snatched up a fallen plasma rifle and took aim at the machine's sensor array, praying to any gods that would listen. It was a desperate gamble, a flickering candle against the onrushing dark. But it was all they had. Humanity's fate hung by a thread, and Darren refused to let it snap. Not on his watch. Rigel's plasma bolt lanced through the air, striking the war machine's sensor array with surgical precision. The blast seared through the delicate optics, burning them out in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The war machine staggered, its weapons swiveling erratically, as it tried to reacquire its targets through the haze of static and error messages flooding its damaged systems. "Now's our chance," Darren roared, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "Light it up!" The squad responded with a hail of pulse fire and plasma grenades, the barrage hammering into the war machine's faltering energy shields. The machine's armor buckled and cracked under the onslaught, its hull glowing cherry red from the heat of the assault. Liam and Ava broke from cover. Rocket launchers braced against their shoulders. They took aim at the machine's legs, the weakest points in its armored chassis. "Fire in the hole!" Liam bellowed as he and Ava pulled the triggers in unison. The rockets streaked towards their target, leaving trails of smoke in their wake. They slammed into the war machine's legs, the shaped charges punching through the weakened armor and detonating inside the limbs with catastrophic force. The explosions ripped the legs apart, shredding metal and hydraulics, sending the behemoth toppling to the ground with an earth-shaking crash. Darren was already moving, sprinting through the smoke and debris towards Rigel's father. The scientist lay slumped against the wall of the lab, his face ashen, his lab coat stained crimson. He clutched a data drive in his trembling hand, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. Darren skidded to a halt beside him, his eyes taking in the scientist's grievous wounds with a soldier's practiced gaze. The man's breath came in shallow, labored gasps, each one a battle against the encroaching darkness. Darren closed his fist around the drive, feeling the weight of it, the weight of all the lives that depended on the secrets it held. He met the scientist's gaze, saw the desperate hope and grim determination burning there, a mirror of his own. He nodded, a silent promise. Then he was hauling the scientist to his feet, slinging the man's arm over his shoulders, taking his weight. Rigel was there in an instant, her face streaked with tears and grime, her small hands helping to support her father as they stumbled towards the extraction point. The squad formed a protective circle around them, their weapons at the ready, their eyes scanning the smoke-filled skies for threats. They moved as one, a well-oiled machine forged in the crucible of war, their footsteps pounding out a staccato rhythm on the blasted earth. The dropship came into view, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos, its engines roaring like an angry god. Its guns spat fire, raking the Andorian positions with high-caliber rounds, buying the squad precious seconds. But the Andorians were not ready to concede defeat. As the dropship descended, its ramp lowering to receive the battered humans, a swarm of drones burst from the clouds, their plasma cannons spitting blue fire. The air sizzled with the heat of energy weapons as Darren and his squad returned fire, their pulse rifles barking until their barrels glowed white-hot. The drones fell from the sky in droves, but more kept coming, an endless tide of metal and malice. They were so close, the dropship's ramp mere meters away, the wind from its engines whipping at their hair and clothes, but the drones pressed their attack with ruthless precision, their fire growing more accurate with each passing second. Darren felt a cold certainty settle over him, a clarity born of a lifetime of hard choices and bitter sacrifices. He knew, with a soldier's instinct, that not all of them would make it. The Andorians would never let them escape, not with the prize they carried. Someone would have to stay behind, to buy the others the time they needed to get away. To get the data drive to safety, someone would have to make the ultimate sacrifice. Darren looked at Rigel, at her father, at the brave men and women of his squad. He saw the same realization in their eyes, the same grim acceptance. They were soldiers, all of them. They knew the price of duty, the cost of honor. He opened his mouth to give the order, to volunteer himself for the task. But before he could speak, a plasma bolt seared past his head, close enough to scorch his hair, to remind him of his own mortality. There was no time for goodbyes, no time for last words or final farewells. There was only the mission, only the desperate, fleeting hope that their sacrifice would not be in vain. Darren made his decision, and the universe held its breath. Darren's voice cut through the chaos like a knife, his words a final, desperate plea. "Liam, take command, get them to safety." He pressed the data drive into his friend's hand, the device slick with blood and sweat. "I'll draw their fire." Liam's eyes widened, his protest forming on his lips, but Darren silenced him with a fierce glare, his jaw set with grim determination. "That's an order, Corporal." Rigel, realizing the gravity of Darren's words, cried out in anguish, her small hands grasping at his armor, trying to pull him back. But her father, his face a mask of pain and understanding, gently pried her away, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We have to go, little one. The sergeant is giving us a chance. We can't let it be in vain." Tears streamed down Rigel's face as she allowed herself to be pulled towards the waiting dropship, her eyes never leaving Darren's. He met her gaze, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, a final, silent goodbye. As the dropship's ramp sealed shut, Darren turned to face the oncoming swarm of drones, their metal bodies glinting in the harsh light of Arcturus's twin suns. He raised his pulse rifle, the weapon thrumming with barely contained energy, and let out a defiant roar, charging forward into the fray. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, scorching the ground at his feet, but Darren weaved and dodged, his armor absorbing the worst of the blows. He fired with reckless abandon, each shot finding its mark, sending drones crashing to the ground in showers of sparks and shrapnel. But for every drone that fell, two more seemed to take its place, an endless tide of mechanical killers. Darren's rifle clicked empty, its power cell drained. He cast it aside, drawing his plasma pistol from its holster, the weapon heavy in his hand. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever, knew that each second he bought was precious, a chance for his squad, for Rigel and her father, to escape. The dropship's engines roared to life, the sound a bittersweet symphony in Darren's ears. He risked a glance over his shoulder, his heart clenching at the sight of Rigel's face pressed against the window, her hand outstretched as if to reach him. A sad, tender smile tugged at his lips, and he mouthed a silent promise, a vow to keep fighting, to give them the time they needed. As the dropship rose into the sky, its guns blazing a path through the drone swarm, Darren turned back to the enemy, his eyes hard with resolve. He raised his pistol, the barrel glowing with barely contained plasma, and let out a wordless battle cry, a challenge to the foes that surrounded him. The drones closed in, their weapons flashing, their metal bodies gleaming with malevolent purpose. Darren met them head-on, his pistol spitting fire, his armor sparking under the onslaught. He fought with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose, each shot, each blow a defiant stand against the tide of darkness. Plasma scorched his armor, searing his flesh beneath, but Darren pushed through the pain, his mind focused on a single, unwavering thought, buying time, giving his squad the chance they needed to escape, to deliver the data drive that could change the course of the war. The drones pressed in, their numbers seemingly endless, but Darren refused to yield. He fought with the fury of a cornered beast, his pistol flashing, his fists and feet lashing out in a deadly dance. But even as he fought, he knew it was a losing battle. The drones were too many, their weapons too powerful. His armor, battered and scorched, could only withstand so much punishment. A plasma bolt caught him in the chest, the force of the blow driving him to his knees. He gasped for breath, his vision swimming, but he forced himself back to his feet, his pistol still clutched in his hand. Darren turned back to the drones, a grim smile on his face. He raised his pistol, the weapon shaking in his grip, and prepared to make his final stand. Darren's pistol glowed white-hot in his hand, its power cell drained to the dregs. Sweat and blood mingled on his brow, stinging his eyes as he blinked away the fatigue. The drones pressed in, their metal carapaces glinting in the harsh light, their weapons thrumming with deadly energy. He braced himself for the end, for the searing heat of plasma and the cold embrace of oblivion, but it never came. Instead, the sky above him erupted in a cacophony of light and sound. Terran fighters, sleek and deadly, tore through the clouds, their pulse cannons ripping through the Andorian drones like a hot knife through butter. The air shimmered with the heat of their passage, the ground trembling beneath the thunder of their engines. Dropships followed in their wake, their hulls gleaming in the sun, disgorging squads of heavily armed Terran soldiers. They hit the ground running, their boots pounding the earth, their weapons spitting fire and fury. It was a sight Darren had never dared to hope for, a full-scale counterattack, a daring raid deep into enemy territory. The Andorians, caught off guard by the ferocity of the assault, fell back in disarray, their formations crumbling under the onslaught. Darren watched in awe as the tide of battle turned, his heart pounding in his chest. He forced himself to his feet, his battered body screaming in protest, and staggered towards the nearest dropship. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing a face he'd thought he might never see again. Liam, his eyes wide with disbelief and joy, leaped down and ran towards him, clasping his hand in a fierce grip. "Rigel and her father?" he asked, the words heavy on his tongue. Liam's face grew serious. "They're safe, thanks to you, the Doubter Drive. It's the key to a new weapon, something that could end this war once and for all." Darren nodded, the weight of his actions settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He knew there would be a price to pay for this victory, that the Andorians would not take this defeat lightly. But for now, as he limped up the ramp and felt the dropship lift off, carrying him away from the smoking ruins of the battlefield, he allowed himself a moment of relief. He thought of Rigel, of the brave little girl who had reminded him what he was fighting for. He knew the war was far from over, that there would be more battles to come. But with soldiers like his squad at his side, and with the hope of a brighter future to guide them, he knew they would prevail. The dropship soared into the sky, leaving the devastation behind. Darren slumped against the bulkhead, letting the exhaustion wash over him in waves. He closed his eyes, the roar of the engines fading to a distant hum, and dreamed of a day when peace would reign among the stars. Months after Darren's fateful stand, the tide of war had turned irrevocably. The weapon born from Rigel's father's brilliance proved the catalyst that shattered the Andorian war machine. Its devastating power crippled their fleets, leveled their fortresses, and sent their armies into panicked retreat. Emboldened, the Terran forces surged forward in an unrelenting offensive. They drove the Andorians back, system by hard-fought system, until the enemy made their final stand on the smouldering surface of their homeworld. The ensuing battle was as brutal as it was brief. The Terrans, armed with superior technology and fueled by righteous fury, overwhelmed the Andorian defenses and forced their unconditional surrender. Now, Darren stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship, his uniform crisp and adorned with the insignia of his new rank. The promotion was a bitter reward, earned in blood and sacrifice. Around him, the bridge crew worked in focused silence, their faces haggard from the long months of conflict. On the view screen, the Andorian delegation approached, their once proud bearing now bent under the weight of defeat. They shuffled into the conference room, where the waiting Terran officials presented them with the terms of surrender. Darren watched as they signed the document, their hands trembling, their faces ashen. There was no joy in this moment, no exultation in victory. The cost had been too high, the scars too deep. Worlds lay in ruin, entire cities reduced to rubble and ash. The death toll, on both sides, was staggering. And for what? Conquest? Glory? In the end, it all seemed so hollow. A soft footstep drew Darren's attention. Rigel stood beside him, her once vibrant eyes now haunted by the spectres of war. She had seen too much, endured too much, for one so young. But through it all, she had been a beacon of hope, a symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. "It's over," she whispered, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. "We won." Rigel turned to him, her gaze searching his face. "What happens now?" she asked, her words echoing the uncertainty that gripped them all. Darren sighed, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. "We rebuild," he said, his voice steady despite the weariness that suffused his being. "We honor the fallen, and we work to create a better future. It won't be easy, and the wounds of this war will take generations to heal, but we'll endure as we always have." Rigel slipped her hand into his, her fingers calloused from the grip of a rifle. "Thank you," she breathed, her words barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. "For everything you've done, for all you've sacrificed." Darren squeezed her hand in return, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared, forged in the crucible of war. Together, they turned to face the viewport, where the stars glittered like cold diamonds against the velvet backdrop of space. A new era dawned, one shaped by the choices they had made and the battles they had fought. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but Darren knew that they would face them head-on, armed with the courage and determination that had carried them through the darkest of times. The Andorian delegation filed out of the conference room, their shoulders slumped in defeat. They shuffled past Darren and Rigel, their eyes downcast, their faces etched with the bitter realization of their loss. Some bore the scars of battle, others the haunted look of those who had seen too much horror. As the last of the delegates disappeared through the airlock, Rigel turned to Darren, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How do we move on from all of this?" Darren met her gaze, his own eyes heavy with the weight of memory. "One day at a time," he said softly. "We lean on each other. We remember the ones we lost, and we fight for a better tomorrow. It's all we can do." Rigel nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She leaned into Darren, her head resting on his shoulder, seeking comfort in his solid presence. Around them, the bridge crew continued their duties, their faces set with grim determination. There would be time for grief, for mourning, for healing. But for now there was work to be done. A shattered galaxy awaited them, a billion broken pieces that needed to be put back together. It was a daunting task, one that would require every ounce of strength and courage they possessed. But as Darren stood there, Rigel at his side, he felt a flicker of hope amid the darkness. They had endured the unthinkable, had stared into the abyss and emerged changed but unbroken. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united by the unbreakable bonds of shared struggle and sacrifice. A new chapter was about to begin, one written in the blood of heroes and the tears of the fallen, and as the stars watched from their eternal vigil, Darren knew that they would not be found wanting. They would rise from the ashes, would rebuild from the rubble, and would forge a future worthy of those who had given everything to make it possible. The comm panel chimed, dragging Darren back to the present. He straightened, squaring his shoulders as he strode forward to answer the call. There was no rest for the weary, no respite for the burdened, but he would bear the load, would carry the weight, for as long as it took. For he was a soldier, a warrior, a guardian of the innocent, and though the war may have ended, his battle was just beginning. The years had not been kind to Darren. The scars of war, both physical and mental, had etched themselves deep into his soul. His once vibrant eyes now held a haunted, weary look, the look of a man who had seen too much, lost too much. But he carried on, as he always had, his sense of duty and honor driving him forward. He was in his quarters, poring over the latest intelligence reports when the door chime sounded. With a sigh, he set down his datapad and called out, "Enter!" The door slid open, revealing a figure that made Darren's breath catch in his throat. It was Rigel, but not the Rigel he remembered. Gone was the innocent, wide-eyed girl he had rescued all those years ago. In her place stood a warrior, her body lean and muscular, her eyes hard and filled with a simmering anger. "Rigel," Darren said, rising to his feet, "what brings you here?" Rigel stepped into the room, her movements precise and controlled. "I bring news," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "My father is dead, assassinated by Andorian insurgents." Darren felt a chill run down his spine. Rigel's father, the brilliant scientist who had created the weapon that ended the war, dead at the hands of the very enemy he had helped to defeat. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. "Your father was a hero. His sacrifice saved countless lives." Rigel's eyes flashed with anger. "His sacrifice," she spat. "He should never have had to make that sacrifice. The Andorians should have been wiped out, every last one of them." Darren flinched at the venom in her words. "Rigel, you know that's not what your father would have wanted. He fought for peace, not vengeance." Rigel slammed her fist against the wall, her voice rising. "Peace. There can be no peace as long as a single Andorian draws breath. They took everything from me, Darren. My home, my family, my childhood. I won't rest until they've paid for what they've done." Darren saw the pain and rage in her eyes, the same pain and rage he had seen in so many soldiers over the years. He knew he had to tread carefully. "What do you need from me?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Rigel met his gaze, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "I need your help, Darren. I need you to come with me, to hunt down the ones responsible for my father's death. You're the only one I can trust." Darren hesitated, torn between his duty and his loyalty to Rigel. He knew that what she was asking was dangerous, that it could jeopardize the fragile peace that had been so hard won. But looking into her eyes, seeing the desperation and the need there, he knew he couldn't refuse. She had saved his life once, and he owed her a debt that could never be repaid. "All right," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I'll help you. But we do this my way, Rigel. No unnecessary risks, no collateral damage. We find the ones responsible and bring them to justice, nothing more." Rigel nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Understood, sir. I'll follow your lead." Darren took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew that this mission would test him in ways he had never been tested before, that it would force him to confront the demons of his past and the darkness in his own heart. But he also knew that he had no choice. He was a soldier, and a soldier's duty was clear. He would fight, and he would die if necessary, to protect the innocent and bring the guilty to justice. Even if that meant facing the ghosts of his own past and the woman he had once saved from the ashes of war. With a heavy heart and a sense of grim determination, Darren began to make his preparations, gathering his gear and assembling a team of his most trusted operatives. They would need all the skill and courage they could muster for the mission ahead, for they were about to descend into the heart of darkness itself, into the shadowy underworld of the Andorian insurgency. As he worked, Darren couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would change everything, that it would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the galaxy itself. But he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. There would be time for doubts and regrets later. Now there was only the mission, and the grim certainty that failure was not an option. Darren and his team boarded a sleek, black stealth ship, its hull designed to evade detection by even the most advanced sensors. Rigel was already on board, her face set in a mask of cold determination. As the ship lifted off, Darren felt a sense of unease wash over him. They were heading into the heart of Andorian space, a region of the galaxy that had been off-limits to Terrans since the end of the war. If they were caught, there would be no mercy, no chance for diplomacy. But there was no turning back now. The die had been cast and the game was afoot. As the ship hurtled through the void, Darren and Rigel pored over the intelligence reports, trying to piece together a picture of the insurgency they were up against. The more they learned, the more Darren felt a sense of dread growing in the pit of his stomach. The Andorian warlord they were hunting was no ordinary criminal. He was a ghost, a phantom who had eluded capture for years. His network was vast and well hidden, a web of shadows that stretched across the galaxy. And now, if the reports were to be believed, he had something even more dangerous at his disposal. Stolen Terran technology, weapons that could turn the tide of any conflict. Darren felt a chill run down his spine at the thought. If the Andorians were able to reverse engineer those weapons, if they were able to mass produce them. He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. They would stop the warlord before it came to that. They had to. As the ship neared its destination, Darren gathered his team for a final briefing. They were a diverse bunch, each with their own unique skills and specialties. There was Liam, his old friend and comrade in arms, a crack shot with a pulse rifle. There was Ava, the medic who had patched him up more times than he could count. And there were others, men and women he had fought beside, bled beside, each one a hero in their own right. Darren looked at each of them in turn, his eyes filled with a fierce pride and a grim determination. "You all know what we're up against," he said, his voice steady and clear. "This won't be easy, but I know each and every one of you will give it your all. For Earth, for the memory of those we've lost, and for the future we're fighting for." As the ship touched down on the outskirts of the Andorian city, Darren felt a sense of unease wash over him. The streets were too quiet, the buildings too still. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. But there was no time for hesitation. They had a mission to complete, and every second counted. With Rigel at his side, Darren led his team into the heart of the city, into the shadows where the insurgency lurked. They moved silently, their weapons at the ready, their senses sharp and alert. It wasn't long before they made contact. A group of Andorian thugs, heavily armed and spoiling for a fight. Darren and his team cut through them like a hot knife through butter, their pulse rifles spitting fire and death. But it was only the beginning. As they pushed deeper into the city, the resistance grew fiercer, the enemies more numerous. They were walking into a trap, Darren realized, a web of deceit and betrayal that had been spun long before they arrived. And at the center of that web, waiting for them with a smile on his face and a gun in his hand, was the warlord himself. The battle was fierce and bloody. a whirlwind of fire and fury that lit up the night sky. Darren and his team fought with everything they had, their pulse rifles blazing, their grenades shaking the earth. But the warlord was a formidable foe, his armor impervious to their weapons, his own gun spitting death with every shot. One by one, Darren's team fell, until only he and Rigel were left standing. And that was when the true horror revealed itself. Rigel, her face twisted in a smile of cruel triumph, turned her gun on Darren, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Did you really think I would let you stop us?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "My father's death was just a ruse, a way to lure you here. And now, thanks to you, we have everything we need to bring the Terran Federation to its knees." Darren felt his world shatter, his heart break into 1,000 pieces. Rigel, the girl he had saved, the woman he had trusted with his life, had betrayed him. And not just him, but everything he had ever fought for, everything he had ever believed in. The battle that followed was the stuff of nightmares, a whirlwind of blood and betrayal that left Darren broken and bleeding. But in the end, through sheer force of will and a determination born of desperation, he emerged victorious. Rigel lay at his feet, her life bleeding out onto the cold metal floor. Darren knelt beside her, cradling her in his arms, his tears mixing with her blood. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice faint and fading. "I let my anger consume me. I betrayed everything you taught me." Darren shook his head, his heart too full for words. He held her close, feeling the life slip from her body, the warmth fade from her skin. And as he knelt there, surrounded by the wreckage of his shattered dreams, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. The war might be over, but the scars it had left would never heal. For in the end, there was no victory, no glory. There was only the bitter taste of ashes in his mouth and the knowledge that he had lost everything he had ever held dear. And as he looked up at the stars, cold and distant in the infinite void, he wondered if there would ever be true peace in a galaxy torn apart by conflict and betrayal. But he knew one thing for certain. He would keep fighting, keep struggling, keep pushing forward, for that was all he knew how to do. And maybe, just maybe, someday he would find a way to put the pieces back together, to rebuild what had been lost. But for now, all he could do was mourn and remember and carry on. For that was the only way he knew how to honor the memory of those who had fallen. And the only way he knew how to keep the flame of hope alive in a universe consumed by darkness. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.